I still see the dust on my boots from that day in Tunisia, March 1943. I was standing in formation when General Patton walked past, and I knew something was different about him. Something cold. The kind of cold that comes after a man watches other men die for mistakes that shouldn't have been made. I was 20 years old then, fresh-faced infantry private attached to the 2nd Corps after Kasserine Pass. That battle, if you can even call it that, was a slaughter. We got hit so hard by Rommel's Africa Corps that some units just collapsed, ran, left equipment behind, left men behind. And when the dust settled and the count came in, everyone knew someone had to answer for it. Patton arrived to clean up the mess. They sent him in like you send a surgeon to cut out infection. And that's exactly what he did. I remember the first officer I saw get relieved, Colonel Henderson. Good man, or so I thought. He'd been kind to us enlisted men, never barked without reason. But Patton called him into a tent one afternoon, and 15 minutes later, Henderson walked out with his face like stone. No insignia, no command, just walking. One of the sergeants told me later that Patton had asked Henderson one question. "Did you hold your ground?" Henderson tried to explain the circumstances, the confusion, the overwhelming force. Patton didn't want to hear it. I watched over the next 2 weeks as Patton systematically removed almost every officer who had any command responsibility at Kasserine. Majors, colonels, even a brigadier general. It didn't matter if you had 20 years of service or if your men loved you. If you were there when we broke, you were gone. Simple as that. The enlisted men, we didn't know what to think at first. Some of these officers had been with us since the States. They'd trained us, shipped out with us, ate the same dust we did. But then you'd remember the chaos at Kasserine, the orders that never came, the positions we were told to hold but had no support for, the tanks that rolled right through us because nobody had planned for them. And you'd think maybe Patton was right. He made us wear our uniforms properly, helmets on at all times, even behind the lines, leggings tied correctly, shave every day, no exceptions. It sounds stupid now, talking about shaving when men were dying, but I understand it better today than I did then. He was rebuilding us from the outside in, making us look like soldiers so we'd act like soldiers. I was on perimeter guard one night when Patton did his inspections. He walked the line himself, 3 in the morning, checking positions. He stopped at my foxhole and asked if I was awake. I said, "Yes, sir." He asked if I'd been at Kasserine. I told him I arrived right after. He stood there quiet for a moment, looking out at the darkness, and then he said something I never forgot. He said, "The men who ran at Kasserine weren't cowards. They were led by cowards. There's a difference." Then he walked on to the next position. The new officers he brought in were different, harder. They didn't try to be our friends. They drilled us constantly, pushed us past what we thought we could do. At the time, I hated it. My feet were blistered. My shoulders ached from the pack. And I thought Patton was just a bastard who wanted to make us suffer. But when we moved up to engage the Germans again at El Guitar, something had changed in us. We held. The Germans came at us with tanks, with artillery, with everything they had, and we held our ground. I was in a fighting hole with a man named Eddie Kowalski from Pittsburgh, and when those panzers started rolling toward us, I felt my stomach drop. But Eddie looked at me and said, "We ain't running." And we didn't. Nobody did. We fought like Patton had rebuilt us to fight. After El Guitar, I understood what Patton had done. He hadn't just fired officers. He'd cut out the rot. He'd removed every man who'd proven in combat that when things got bad, they couldn't lead. It wasn't personal for him. It was mathematical. If you failed your men once, you'd fail them again, and next time, more of them would die. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I saw one of those fired officers years later after the war. It was 1947, I think, at a VFW hall in Pennsylvania. Colonel Henderson, he was there with his son, teaching the kid how to play pool. He saw me across the room and we both just kind of nodded. Later at the bar, he bought me a drink without saying anything. Then he said, "Patton was right about me." Just that, nothing else. I didn't know what to say, so I just drank with him. The thing people don't understand about military leadership is that kindness can kill. A kind officer who can't make hard decisions will get his men killed just as sure as a cruel one. Patton understood that. He wasn't cruel, not really. He was ruthless. There's a difference. I remember the briefing before we moved out for Sicily, July 1943. Patton stood in front of the entire division and told us we were going to take that island faster than anyone thought possible. He told us we were going to prove that American soldiers were the best in the world, and I believed him. We all did, because he'd already proven to us that he wouldn't accept anything less than excellence, not from himself and not from us. The officers he'd brought in after the Purge, they were believers too. Captain Morrison, who took over my company, had been a staff officer before. Quiet man, methodical. But he understood Patton's system. Every order was clear. Every plan had a backup. Every man knew his job. When we hit the beaches in Sicily, there was no confusion. We knew exactly what to do and we did it. I got hit near Palermo, took shrapnel in my leg. Nothing serious, but enough to send me to a field hospital for a week. Patton visited that hospital. I was lying in a cot when he walked through, and he stopped at every bed. When he got to me, he asked where I got hit. I told him. He asked if I'd be ready to rejoin my unit. I said, yes, sir. He nodded and moved on. Some people called those hospital visits publicity stunts, but I was there. He looked every wounded man in the eye. That meant something. The slapping incidents came later, in August. I wasn't there when they happened, but word spread fast through the ranks. Patton had slapped 2 soldiers in different hospitals, called them cowards for being there with battle fatigue instead of wounds. The officers tried to keep it quiet, but in an army, nothing stays quiet. My feelings on it were mixed then, and they're still mixed now. I'd seen men break under the strain. I'd seen good men, brave men, just stop functioning because their minds couldn't take anymore. Were they cowards? I didn't think so, but I also understood Patton's logic, even if I didn't agree with it. He believed that accepting weakness would spread weakness, that if you let one man quit, others would follow. The scandal almost destroyed him. Eisenhower nearly sent him home. For months, Patton was sidelined while other generals led the operations he'd trained us for. And I'll tell you something, we felt the difference. The new commanders were competent, sure, but they weren't Patton. They didn't have that edge, that absolute certainty that we would win because failure wasn't an option. When Patton came back to command 3rd Army in 1944, it was like someone had turned a switch back on. We were preparing for France, for the real invasion. And suddenly, everything moved faster, sharper, cleaner. The officers who'd learned under him in Africa and Sicily, they brought that same intensity to the new units. And those of us who'd been with him from the beginning, we knew what was coming. We were going to move fast and hit hard, and we weren't going to stop. I landed at Normandy in July, about a month after D-Day. By then, the beachhead was secure, but we were still fighting through the hedgerows. Brutal work, close and mean. Every field a potential ambush, every hedge a fortress. But 3rd Army under Patton, once we broke through at St-Lô, we didn't stop. We rolled across France like a flood. I remember crossing into Germany in September. We'd been advancing so fast that supply lines couldn't keep up. We were low on fuel, low on ammunition, but Patton kept pushing. He'd radioed back to command that he could end the war by Christmas if they'd just give him the supplies. They didn't. They diverted resources to Montgomery's Market Garden operation instead. When that failed, and it failed badly, I think part of Patton died inside. We spent that winter fighting through some of the worst conditions I've ever experienced. The Battle of the Bulge hit in December, and 3rd Army had to wheel north in the middle of a blizzard to relieve Bastogne. People call it Patton's greatest achievement, that rapid redeployment, and maybe it was. But I was there, freezing in a truck convoy, knowing we were heading into a desperate fight, and all I could think was that this wouldn't have been necessary if they'd let us finish the job in September. We reached Bastogne on December 26th. The 101st Airborne had held the town surrounded for a week, and when we broke through, those paratroopers looked at us like we were ghosts. I think they'd stopped believing anyone was coming, but Patton had told us we'd get there, and we got there. Because that's what he'd trained us to do. You don't give up, you don't slow down, you complete the mission. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The war ended in May 1945. I was in Czechoslovakia when we got the news. Germany had surrendered. After 3 years of fighting, it was just over. We celebrated, of course. Drank whatever we could find. Fired our weapons in the air. Hugged each other like brothers. Because that's what we were. The men I'd fought with, we'd become brothers in a way that's hard to explain to people who weren't there. But even in that celebration, there was a strange emptiness. We'd been soldiers for so long that we didn't know how to be anything else. And Patton, I think he felt that more than any of us. He was a warrior in a world that was about to have no use for warriors. I saw him one last time in July 1945. He was touring the occupation zone and stopped at our camp. By then, he'd been made military governor of Bavaria, a job he clearly hated. He wanted to fight the Russians, thought they were the next threat. He said so openly. It got him in trouble, like always. He walked through the camp and he looked tired. Not physically tired, but soul tired, like a man who'd done what he was born to do and now had nothing left. He stopped to talk to a group of us, and someone asked him what he planned to do now that the war was over. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, and he said, "I suppose I'll fade away like old soldiers do." He died that December, car accident in Germany. When word reached us, even though most of us were back in the States by then, it felt like losing a father. A hard father, a demanding father, sometimes a cruel father, but our father nonetheless. I've thought a lot over the years about those officers he fired after Kasserine Pass. Were they really failures? Some of them went on to successful civilian careers. Some became politicians, businessmen, teachers. They lived long lives and probably contributed more to peacetime society than I ever did. But in that moment, in that war, they hadn't been what was needed. And Patton made the hard call to remove them. That's leadership, not the kind they talk about in books, where everyone gets a second chance and everything works out. Real leadership, the kind that exists when men are dying, is about making choices that hurt. It's about firing the colonel who's a good man but a bad commander. It's about pushing soldiers past their limits because the alternative is death. It's about being hated in the moment so that people can survive to hate you later. I don't know if Patton was a good man. I think he was probably a difficult man, an arrogant man, a complicated man. But he was a great commander, and in war, that's what matters. He took an army that had been humiliated and broken and turned it into one of the most effective fighting forces in history. He did it by demanding everything from everyone, including himself. And yes, he did it by firing every officer who failed him at Kasserine Pass. Some people say that was harsh. Maybe it was. But those fired officers didn't have to watch their men die in the next battle because they weren't capable of leading them. The new officers Patton brought in, the ones he trusted, they kept us alive. They led us through Sicily, through France, through Germany. And most of us made it home. I'm 92 years old now. Most of the men I served with are gone. Patton's been gone for almost 80 years. But I still think about that day in Tunisia when he walked past my position, cold and determined. I think about the officers who disappeared overnight. I think about how angry we were at the time, how unfair it all seemed. And I think about how many of us lived because of what he did. There's a photograph I keep in my desk drawer. It's from Sicily, summer of 1943. My squad standing in front of a captured German bunker. We're dirty, exhausted, but we're smiling. Captain Morrison is on the end, that serious look he always had. He was one of Patton's new officers, brought in after the Purge. 3 months later, he died at Salerno, leading his men from the front just like Patton taught him. I look at that photograph sometimes and wonder what would have happened if Patton hadn't made the changes he made. Would we even have taken that bunker? Would I be here to remember it? I don't know. Nobody can know. But I believe that the hard decisions Patton made in March 1943 saved lives later. Maybe they saved mine. People want their heroes to be perfect. They want leaders who are kind and decisive, strong and compassionate, bold and thoughtful. That's not how it works. Real people are contradictions. Patton was brilliant and arrogant, brave and reckless, demanding and occasionally cruel. He slapped soldiers suffering from battle fatigue, which was inexcusable. He also turned a defeated army into a winning one, which was essential. History remembers him as controversial. The military still studies his campaigns. But for me, he's just the general who made the hard calls that kept me alive. The man who understood that in war, sentimentality is a luxury that gets people killed. The commander who fired every officer who failed him because he knew those officers would fail again. I never became an officer myself. Ended the war as a staff sergeant, which was fine by me. I'd seen what the job cost. The weight of responsibility, the knowledge that your decisions meant life or death for the men under you. I didn't want that. I wanted to go home, marry my girl, raise a family, live a quiet life. And I did. But sometimes, usually late at night when sleep won't come, I think about those days in North Africa. The dust, the heat, the fear that we weren't good enough to win. And I think about the man who walked through our camp at 3 a.m, checking our positions, making sure we were ready. The man who fired the officers who let us down and brought in ones who wouldn't. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. My grandson asked me once if I thought Patton was a hero. He was doing a school project on World War II, and he'd read about the slapping incidents, the controversial statements, the arrogance. He wanted to know what I thought. I told him that hero is a complicated word. I said Patton was necessary. In that time, in that war, we needed someone exactly like him. Someone who wouldn't accept excuses, who wouldn't tolerate failure, who would do whatever it took to win. Whether that makes him a hero, I let my grandson decide for himself. The boy got an A on the project. He's in college now, studying history. He tells me he wants to understand war so that maybe his generation can avoid it. I hope he's right. But I also know that there will always be times when hard men have to make hard decisions. And when those times come, the George Pattons of the world are what stand between civilization and chaos. I received a letter once, years after the war, from the daughter of Colonel Henderson. The officer I'd seen get relieved after Kasserine Pass. She was writing to veterans who'd served under her father, trying to understand what happened to him. She said he never talked about the war, never explained why he came home without his command. She wanted to know if I remembered him. I wrote back, told her what I knew, that her father had been a kind man, a decent man, but that war is not kind and not decent. That General Patton had made a decision that probably saved lives, even though it destroyed careers. That her father had carried that weight with dignity from what I saw. I don't know if my letter helped her. I hope it did. The thing is, there were no real villains in that story. Henderson wasn't a coward or a fool. He was just a peacetime officer thrust into a war he wasn't prepared for. Patton wasn't a heartless tyrant. He was a commander who understood that war is won or lost based on the competence of leadership. Both men did what they thought was right. One paid the price so that others could live. That's what war does. It creates impossible situations where every choice has a cost. You learn to live with that or you break. I saw men break. Good men, strong men, men who I thought were unbreakable. The mind can only take so much. But the ones who survived, who kept going day after day through hell, we learned something about ourselves. We learned that humans can endure almost anything if they have a reason to. Patton gave us a reason. He made us believe that we were part of something larger than ourselves, that our suffering had meaning, that if we just kept pushing forward, kept following orders, kept trusting our leaders, we would win. And we did win. The cost was terrible, but we won. I don't romanticize the war. I don't look back on it as the best time of my life or any of that nonsense. It was horrible. I saw friends die. I watched cities burn. I did things I wish I could forget. But I also saw human courage that still takes my breath away. I saw men sacrifice everything for each other. I saw leadership that demanded the impossible and somehow got it. That's what I remember most about Patton. Not the pearl-handled revolvers or the famous speeches or the controversy. I remember the absolute certainty he projected that we would win. When everything was chaos and death, when nothing made sense, Patton made sense. He had a plan, he had standards, and he had no tolerance for failure. In the insanity of war, that clarity was what we needed. The officers he fired after Kasserine Pass, they became a lesson. Not a lesson in cruelty, but a lesson in accountability. It told every officer in Second Corps that there were standards that would be enforced, that failure had consequences, that if you couldn't do the job, someone else would. It sounds harsh, and it was harsh, but it worked. We went from being an army that ran at Kasserine Pass to being an army that chased the Germans across Europe. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because Patton demanded it and because he was willing to make the hard decisions necessary to achieve it. The officers he kept, the ones who met his standards, they learned from his example. They became the kind of leaders who could win battles. Captain Morrison, who I mentioned earlier, he was one of those officers. He'd been a staff officer before Patton promoted him to company command. Morrison was terrified at first. I could see it. He knew what had happened to the previous company commander, knew that Patton had no patience for mistakes. But he studied, he trained, he pushed himself to be better. And when the moment came in Sicily, when we were pinned down by German machine guns and needed someone to make a decision, Morrison made it. He led an assault himself, flanked the position, and we took it. He didn't survive the war, but he died a competent officer. Patton's training had given him the tools to lead, and he used them well. His men, my fellow soldiers, we survived that engagement because Morrison knew what to do. That was Patton's legacy, multiplied across hundreds of officers who learned from him. I've lived a long life since then, 79 years since the war ended. I've had a career, raised children, buried my wife, welcomed grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I voted in elections, paid taxes, mowed lawns, complained about the weather. Normal life, the kind of life millions of men fought and died to preserve. But there's a part of me that never left those battlefields. A part that's still 20 years old, standing in formation in Tunisia, watching officers get relieved, still crossing the Rhine under fire, still liberating concentration camps and seeing horrors that humans inflicted on other humans. War changes you. It rewrites something deep inside. You can live a normal life afterward, but you're never quite normal again. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Patton understood that. He understood that soldiers carry the war with them forever. That's why he was so hard on us, I think. He wanted us to be so well trained, so well led, that we'd have the best chance possible of surviving. Every man he pushed harder than they thought they could go. That was one more man who might make it home. Every officer he fired for incompetence, that was potentially dozens of soldiers who wouldn't die because of poor leadership. The math was brutal but simple. In war, competence means life and incompetence means death. Patton did the math and acted on it. The officers he fired at Kasserine Pass weren't bad people. They were just the wrong people for that moment. And Patton had the clarity and the courage to recognize that and act on it, even though it destroyed careers and hurt feelings. Could he have done it differently? Could he have given those officers another chance, worked with them, helped them improve? Maybe. But time was a luxury he didn't have. Men were dying every day. The Germans were winning battles they should have lost. Something had to change immediately, and Patton changed it the only way he knew how, completely and ruthlessly. I don't expect everyone to agree with what he did. I'm not sure I agree with everything he did, but I'm alive to have this conversation because of the decisions he made. That's not nothing. That's everything. There's a cemetery in Normandy where many of the men I served with are buried. I've been back there twice, once in 1984 and once in 2004. Walking among those white crosses, reading names I remembered, it brings everything back. These were boys, really, 18, 19, 20 years old. They never got to live the life I've lived. They died on foreign soil fighting a war that wasn't their fault, but was their responsibility. And I think about the leaders who sent them into battle, the good leaders and the bad ones, the ones who got them killed unnecessarily and the ones who gave them a fighting chance. Patton was the latter. His methods were harsh, his personality was difficult, his judgment was sometimes flawed. But when his soldiers went into battle, they were as prepared as any soldiers could be. They had competent officers, clear orders, and the best training possible. That was his gift to us. Not affection or warmth or kindness. Competence, standards, leadership. In war, that's the only gift that matters. I wish I could tell you that the lessons of Patton's Purge after Kasserine Pass had been learned permanently. That modern militaries understood the importance of accountability, of removing failed leaders quickly, of demanding excellence. But that's not how institutions work. Every generation has to learn the same lessons, usually through the same painful failures. What I can tell you is that for those of us who served under Patton, who watched him rebuild an army from its failures, the lesson was clear. Leadership matters, standards matter, accountability matters. A kind leader who can't lead will get you killed. A harsh leader who demands excellence will keep you alive. It's an uncomfortable truth. We want to believe that good people automatically make good leaders, that compassion and competence go hand in hand. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And in war, when lives hang in the balance, you need leaders who are competent first and compassionate second. Patton was competent. He studied war his entire life. He understood tactics and strategy better than almost anyone. He could look at a map and see opportunities that others missed. He could assess an officer's capability in minutes. He knew how to motivate soldiers, how to push them beyond their limits, how to build an army that could win. Was he perfect? No. The slapping incidents showed poor judgment. His statements about the Russians and other topics got him in trouble repeatedly. He could be arrogant, insensitive, and difficult. But in his core competency, leading soldiers in combat, he was exceptional. And that's what mattered in 1943, when he arrived to clean up after Kasserine Pass. The officers he fired, I wonder about them sometimes. Did they understand why it happened? Did they accept it? Or did they carry bitterness the rest of their lives? Colonel Henderson seemed to have made peace with it from that brief conversation I had with him in 1947. But there were others I never saw again. Officers who disappeared from the army and disappeared from history. Their sacrifice, and it was a sacrifice even if it wasn't death, contributed to the victory. By being removed, they made space for better leaders. Their failure became a lesson that improved the army. That's a strange kind of service, to contribute by being removed, but it's service nonetheless. I think about that sometimes when I face failures in my own life. Times when I wasn't good enough, when I let people down, when I had to step aside for someone better. It's humbling, it's painful. But sometimes it's necessary. Recognizing that you're not the right person for a job, that someone else could do it better, that your continued presence is hurting rather than helping. That takes a different kind of courage than charging a machine gun nest. Patton taught me that, not through words, but through actions. He showed me that true leadership sometimes means making yourself unpopular, that doing the right thing often means doing the hard thing, that protecting your soldiers might mean being harsh with them, that winning a war requires ruthless honesty about capabilities and performance. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm not sure what else there is to say. I'm an old man remembering a young man's war. The details fade, but the feelings remain. The fear, the pride, the grief, the relief of survival. And above it all, the memory of a general who demanded everything from us and somehow got it. Patton's Purge after Kasserine Pass wasn't the biggest event of World War II. It's barely mentioned in history books. But for those of us who were there, who served under the officers he brought in to replace the ones he fired, it was everything. It was the difference between an army that could fight and an army that would break. It was the difference between life and death. So yes, Patton fired every officer who failed him at Kasserine Pass. It was brutal, it was necessary, and it saved lives, probably including mine. That's the truth as I lived it. Not the way they teach it in schools, not the way it appears in movies, but the way it was in the dust and heat of Tunisia in March 1943, when a hard man made hard choices. I'm glad he did. I'm alive because he did. That's enough for me. Maybe that's enough for history too. The sun is setting outside my window now. Another day closer to joining the men I served with, the ones who didn't make it home. I've had 79 years they didn't get. I've tried to live well enough for all of us. I don't know if I succeeded, but I tried. And I remember the officers who were there one day and gone the next. I remember the new officers who replaced them, who led us through Sicily and France and Germany. I remember Patton walking through camp at 3 in the morning, checking on his soldiers. I remember believing that we would win, because he told us we would. Most of all, I remember the men, the soldiers who fought and died under those officers, both the ones who failed and the ones who succeeded. They deserved the best leadership possible. Patton made sure they got it, whatever the cost. That's what I'll take with me when my time comes. Not the glory or the medals or the victory, just the knowledge that I served with good men under competent leaders. That when the moment came, we did our jobs. That the sacrifices we made meant something. Patton's brutal purge after Kasserine Pass was part of that. A necessary part, a painful part, but part of what turned defeat into victory, chaos into order, failure into success. I lived it, I remember it, and now I've told you about it. That's all an old soldier can do. Remember and tell the truth as he saw it. The rest is for you to decide. Pod continuar com o rotero. 0849I was telling you about remembering, but there's more I need to say. Things I've kept quiet about for decades because nobody really wanted to hear them. But at 92, you stop worrying so much about what people want to hear and start worrying about what needs to be said before you're gone. The purge didn't end with those first officers in March. That's what people don't understand. Patton kept evaluating, kept watching, kept removing anyone who didn't meet his standards throughout the entire campaign in North Africa. It wasn't a one-time event. It was a continuous process. He was building something, reshaping an army one decision at a time. I remember a major named Carlson. Good man, decorated in World War I, 25 years of service. He commanded a battalion and his men respected him. But during an engagement near El Guitar in late March, his unit got pinned down and he hesitated. Just for a few minutes, but those minutes cost lives. Patton found out about it. I don't know how. He always seemed to know everything. 3 days later, Carlson was gone, reassigned to a training command stateside. The thing that struck me was how quickly it happened. No big investigation, no court-martial, no public spectacle, just gone. And a new major showed up the next morning, younger guy named Peterson, and we moved out on schedule like nothing had changed. That's how Patton operated. Swift, decisive, final. Peterson turned out to be excellent. He led that battalion all the way through Sicily and into Italy before he got wounded at Anzio. The men who served under him, they came through battles that would have been disasters under weaker leadership. How many of them lived because Patton made that change? 10? 20? More? Nobody counts those lives. Nobody puts up a monument to the soldiers who didn't die because their commander was competent. But I count them. I've had 79 years to think about it, and I count them. There was a lieutenant in my company, young kid from Boston named William DeMarco. 22 years old, college educated, spoke Italian because his grandparents came from Sicily. He was smart, really smart, but he didn't have the instinct for combat. Book learning doesn't teach you how to react when mortars start falling. You either have it or you don't. DeMarco didn't have it. In our first firefight after Patton took command, DeMarco froze, just for a second, but in combat, a second is forever. Sergeant Kowalski, the same Eddie I told you about earlier, he had to physically push DeMarco into cover and take over giving orders to the platoon. We got through it. Nobody died, but everyone saw what happened. Captain Morrison, our new company commander, he saw it too. That night he relieved DeMarco of his platoon and made him a supply officer. DeMarco was humiliated. He came from a military family, wanted to prove himself in combat, and suddenly he was counting ammunition crates behind the lines. He requested a transfer, wanted another chance. Morrison denied it. At the time, some of us thought it was harsh. DeMarco was a good guy. He just had a bad moment. Everyone deserves a second chance, right? But Morrison had learned from Patton that second chances in combat mean dead soldiers. You find out what someone's made of under fire, and if they don't have it, you move them somewhere they can't get people killed. DeMarco survived the war, worked supply all the way through, never saw combat again. I ran into him at a reunion in 1967, and you know what he told me? He said Morrison saved his life. Said he'd realized after the war that he would have gotten himself and others killed if he'd stayed in a combat leadership position. Took him 20 years to understand it, but he understood. That's the thing about Patton's methods. They seemed cruel in the moment, but made sense later, sometimes much later. You had to live long enough to gain perspective, to see the alternative paths that didn't happen because someone made a hard decision. After North Africa, we prepared for Sicily. Months of training, planning, rehearsing. Patton was everywhere during that time. He'd show up at training exercises unannounced, watch us work, ask questions. He was looking for weaknesses, for officers who weren't cutting it, for problems that would get men killed when the real fighting started. One day he watched our company do an amphibious landing drill. We'd done it a dozen times already, had it down pretty well. But Captain Morrison made a small mistake in the timing of the landing craft deployment. Small mistake. Probably wouldn't have mattered in actual combat. Patton noticed. He pulled Morrison aside afterward, and I don't know what was said, but Morrison looked shaken when he came back. For the next 2 weeks, Morrison drilled us on amphibious landings constantly. Morning, noon, night. We did them in good weather and bad, daylight and darkness, with full gear and without. He was obsessed with getting it perfect. And when we hit the beaches in Sicily on July 10th, that landing was flawless. Our company had 0 casualties in the initial assault because Morrison had prepared us for every possibility. That was Patton's influence spreading through the ranks. He didn't just fire bad officers, he terrified adequate officers into becoming excellent ones. The fear of being relieved, of failing and being sent home in disgrace, it pushed men to heights they didn't know they could reach. Was it healthy? Probably not. Did it win battles? Absolutely. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Sicily was brutal in its own way, not like North Africa where you could see the enemy coming across open desert. Sicily was towns and mountains, close fighting, civilians everywhere. We took Palermo in late July, and I remember the confusion of liberating a city that had been under fascist control. People cheering us, throwing flowers, but also people angry, scared, caught between armies. Patton drove through Palermo in a jeep the day after we took it. I was on guard duty at a checkpoint when he passed. He didn't stop, just kept moving, heading toward the front. always pushing forward, never satisfied with what we'd already achieved. That was his nature. Victory wasn't enough. It had to be complete victory, total victory, achieved faster than anyone thought possible. The race to Messina became personal for him. Montgomery's British forces were coming up the other side of the island, and Patton was determined to get there first. He pushed us hard, maybe too hard. We were exhausted, running on fumes, but we kept going because he demanded it. And we got there first. August 17th, we entered Messina hours ahead of the British. Was it worth it? The lives it cost? The strain it put on men who were already at their limit? Patton thought so. He believed that maintaining momentum, keeping pressure on the enemy, not giving them time to rest or regroup, that was how you won wars. And maybe he was right. The Germans evacuated Sicily before we could trap them, but they were retreating. We were advancing. That mattered. But then came the slapping incidents, and everything changed for Patton. I told you about them earlier, but I didn't tell you how it felt in the ranks. We were confused mostly. We'd been taught that battle fatigue was weakness, that real soldiers pushed through. Patton believed that absolutely. So when he slapped those soldiers, he thought he was helping them, shocking them back to themselves. He was wrong. I know that now. Battle fatigue, what we call PTSD today, it's real. It's not weakness. The mind can only process so much trauma before it breaks, and that's not a moral failure. But in 1943, we didn't understand that. Patton didn't understand that. He saw it as a failure of will, and he reacted the way he reacted to all failures, harshly. The army covered it up for months, but eventually it leaked. Newspapers back home got hold of the story, and suddenly Patton was a villain. The general who'd rebuilt our army, who'd turned defeat into victory, who'd driven us across Sicily faster than anyone thought possible, he was reduced to the man who slapped shell-shocked soldiers. I had mixed feelings then, and I still do. What he did was wrong, unquestionably wrong. Those soldiers deserved compassion, not violence. But I also remembered the officers he'd fired for incompetence, the standards he'd enforced, the lives that had been saved because he demanded excellence. Could you separate the good from the bad? Could you condemn the slapping while acknowledging the victories? History has tried to answer that question and hasn't quite managed it. Patton remains controversial, complicated, difficult to categorize. That seems right to me. He was a complicated man operating in complicated circumstances. Reducing him to hero or villain misses something essential. While Patton was sidelined after the slapping scandal, I fought in Italy. Salerno, where Captain Morrison died. Then Anzio, where we got stuck on that miserable beachhead for months, shelled constantly, unable to advance or retreat. It was during Anzio that I really understood what Patton's absence meant. The generals in Italy were competent. They were careful, methodical, by the book. They didn't make major mistakes. They also didn't achieve major victories. We just ground forward slowly, paying for every mile with blood, fighting the same way the British and French had fought in World War I. Attrition warfare. Whoever could afford to lose more men would win. Patton would have hated it. He would have found a way to break the stalemate, to flank the Germans, to move fast and hit hard. Maybe it would have worked, maybe it wouldn't have. But the slow grinding misery of Anzio, that definitely wasn't working. We were dying by the hundreds for tiny gains that didn't matter. I got malaria at Anzio, spent 3 weeks in a hospital in Naples, delirious and miserable. When I recovered, they sent me back to England instead of back to Italy. I was going to be part of the force preparing for the invasion of France. June 1944 was approaching, and everyone knew something big was coming. In England, I heard that Patton had been given command of Third Army. He was back. Not in charge of the invasion, Eisenhower wasn't ready to trust him with that. But he'd be part of the campaign once we broke through. The officers who'd served under him in North Africa and Sicily, they were excited. The rest of us, we didn't know what to expect. I landed at Normandy on July 2nd, D-Day plus 26. The beach was secure by then, but we were still fighting through the hedgerows. Every field was a fortress, every road a death trap. The Germans had turned Normandy into a nightmare of defensive positions, and we were paying heavily for every yard. Third Army wasn't deployed yet. They were being held in reserve, and the Germans thought Patton was commanding the invasion force at Pas de Calais. It was a deception, making the Germans keep their reserves in the wrong place. Patton hated it, being used as bait, but it worked. When Third Army finally deployed after the breakout at Saint-Lô, everything changed. Suddenly we were moving. Patton drove his forces across France like he'd driven us across Sicily. relentlessly, refusing to let the Germans establish defensive lines. Town after town fell. Paris was liberated. We reached the German border by September. I wasn't in Third Army. I was assigned to First Army under Hodges. But we heard stories about Patton's advance, about how fast they were moving, how aggressively they were fighting. It was like hearing about a different war. We were still grinding through defensive positions. They were racing across France. The officers in First Army, some of them resented Patton, thought he was reckless, thought he took unnecessary risks, thought he was more concerned with glory than with the lives of his men. Maybe there was some truth to that, but his men loved him. They complained about him constantly, about the strict uniform standards and the demanding schedule and the relentless pace. But they loved him because he won and because he kept them moving forward instead of sitting in trenches being shelled. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. September 1944 was when it all fell apart. We were at the German border, out of fuel, out of supplies. The logistics couldn't keep up with how fast we'd advanced. Patton wanted to push into Germany, thought he could end the war by Christmas. Eisenhower said no. He diverted resources to Montgomery for Operation Market Garden, the airborne assault in Holland. Market Garden failed badly. Thousands of casualties, nothing achieved. Meanwhile, Patton's Third Army sat idle on the German border, waiting for fuel that never came. By the time we got moving again, the Germans had reinforced their positions. The easy breakthrough was gone. We were back to grinding warfare. I've thought about that decision a lot over the years. What if Eisenhower had backed Patton instead of Montgomery? Could we have ended the war in 1944? Would it have saved lives or cost more? Nobody knows. History doesn't let you replay decisions with different choices. What I do know is that we spent a miserable winter fighting through Germany instead of being home. The Battle of the Bulge in December was the result of that delay. The Germans had time to plan a counteroffensive, and they hit us hard in the Ardennes. Third Army's response to the Bulge, that's what people remember about Patton now. The rapid redeployment north, the relief of Bastogne, the aggressive counterattack. It was brilliant, tactically. But it was also heartbreaking because it shouldn't have been necessary. If we'd finished the war in September like Patton wanted, there wouldn't have been a Battle of the Bulge. I was near Aachen when the Bulge started. We heard about the German breakthrough and knew it was bad. Then word came that Third Army was wheeling north to counterattack, in a blizzard. With minimal preparation time, everyone said it was impossible. Patton did it anyway, because that's who he was. When everyone said something couldn't be done, he did it. When conventional wisdom said to wait for better conditions, he attacked immediately. When other generals would have made excuses, he made plans. My unit moved north too, reinforcing the line. I spent Christmas 1944 in a frozen foxhole in Belgium, eating cold rations and wondering if I'd see another Christmas. We all wondered that. The Germans were desperate, fighting harder than they had since Normandy. For a few weeks, it genuinely felt like we might lose. But we didn't lose. Patton's forces broke through to Bastogne. The weather cleared and our air support came back. The German offensive collapsed. By late January, we were pushing them back, and by February, the war was clearly in its final phase. I crossed into Germany in early March 1945. 2 years after watching Patton purge the officer corps in North Africa, I was crossing the Rhine River into the heart of Nazi Germany. The symmetry of that timing wasn't lost on me. Everything that had happened, all the battles and deaths and advances, it had started with those decisions Patton made in March 1943. Germany was different from France. The civilians weren't greeting us as liberators. They were scared, hostile, or just broken. Their country was being destroyed around them, and they knew it. Some still believed in Hitler. Most just wanted the war to end. And we were bringing the end to them, one town at a time. I was there when we liberated Buchenwald, April 11th, 1945. I'm not going to describe what we found there. Some things are beyond words. But I'll tell you this. Every question I'd ever had about whether the war was worth fighting, whether the sacrifices were justified, whether we were really the good guys, all of those questions were answered in that camp. We were fighting evil, real evil, the kind of evil that builds factories for murdering people. And every day we'd delayed, every battle we'd lost, every mistake our officers had made, that evil had continued. Patton's ruthlessness, his obsession with winning quickly and completely, suddenly made perfect sense. He'd understood the stakes in a way that kinder, gentler officers hadn't. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. I was in Czechoslovakia. We celebrated, but it was muted. We'd seen too much, done too much, lost too many friends. Victory felt more like exhaustion than triumph. Patton, I heard, was frustrated that we'd stopped at the agreed-upon line with the Soviets instead of pushing further east. He wanted to keep going, to push the Russians back while we had the advantage. Most of us just wanted to go home. We'd been fighting for years. We were done. But Patton was never done. He couldn't be done. War was his purpose, his meaning. Without it, he was just a difficult old man in a uniform. They made him military governor of Bavaria, and he was terrible at it. He said things he shouldn't say, made decisions that caused diplomatic problems, treated the occupation like it was still combat. I was back in the States by then, being processed out of the army. I heard about Patton's controversies, but they seemed distant, irrelevant. I was home. I'd survived. Nothing else mattered much. When word came in December that Patton had died in a car accident, I was working my first civilian job at a factory in Pennsylvania. Someone brought in a newspaper with the story. We all stopped working and read it. Several of us had served under him at various points. We didn't say much, just stood there reading, remembering. That night I went home and tried to explain to my wife what Patton had meant to the men who served under him. She listened patiently, but I don't think she really understood. How could she? She hadn't been there, hadn't watched him rebuild an army from humiliation, hadn't benefited from the standards he enforced and the officers he fired and the excellence he demanded. The years passed. I lived my normal life, raised 3 kids, worked 40 years at that factory, retired, buried my wife, watched my grandchildren grow up. Normal American life, the kind that millions of men died to preserve. I tried not to think about the war too much. It was in the past. I'd survived it and moved on, but you never really move on, not completely. The war is always there, just under the surface. Certain sounds bring it back. The smell of diesel fuel, fireworks on the 4th of July. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking I was still in that foxhole in Belgium, freezing and scared. And I'd think about Patton, about the decisions he made, about the officers he fired and the standards he enforced and the ruthlessness he displayed, about whether it had all been worth it, about whether a kinder, gentler approach might have worked just as well. I always came to the same conclusion. In war, kindness kills, gentleness loses. The leaders who win are the ones willing to make hard decisions, to fire good men who aren't good enough, to push soldiers past their breaking point, to be hated if that's what victory requires. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. My son asked me once, he was maybe 40 at the time, why I never talked much about the war. He'd grown up with a father who'd been there, who'd done things, who'd seen things, but I'd never shared much. He wanted to know why. I told him that some experiences don't translate well into words, that you had to be there to understand, that the kind of men who talk a lot about war usually didn't see much of it. The ones who really saw it, who really lived it, they tend to keep quiet. But that wasn't the whole truth. The real truth is that I was protecting him, protecting all of them, my wife and kids, from what I'd seen and done. I wanted them to live in a world where those things weren't real, where evil on that scale couldn't exist, where human beings didn't do to each other what I'd witnessed. Patton wouldn't have understood that impulse. He would have said that protecting people from truth makes them weak. That sanitizing war for civilian consumption means the next generation won't be prepared when their war comes. He was probably right about that too. That's the thing about Patton. He was right about a lot of things, even when being right made him difficult and controversial and disliked. He understood war in a way that most people never will and hopefully never need to. He understood that winning requires ruthlessness, that good intentions don't stop bullets, that somewhere between being too harsh and too soft was a line where you could push soldiers to be their best without breaking them, and he lived on that line. Did he cross it sometimes? Yes, the slapping incidents proved that, but he also saved countless lives by refusing to tolerate incompetent leadership. The officers he fired after Kasserine Pass, that wasn't cruelty, that was mathematics. Every incompetent officer was a certain number of dead soldiers. Removing them meant saving those soldiers. Simple equation. I turned 70 in 1993, 50 years after Kasserine Pass. There was a veterans gathering in Washington, D.C. that year, and I attended. Saw men I hadn't seen in decades. We were old by then, white-haired and slow-moving, but when we got together, the years fell away. We were young again for a few hours. Someone brought up Patton, and that started a conversation that lasted all evening. Everyone had opinions. Some men loved him, some hated him, most felt both at once. But everyone agreed on one thing: he'd been necessary. In that moment, in that war, we'd needed someone exactly like him. One of the men, I can't remember his name, he'd been an officer in Third Army. He said something I've never forgotten. He said, "Patton understood that in war, being liked is a luxury and being respected is a necessity. He chose respect." That seemed right to me. Patton didn't need us to like him. He needed us to follow his orders, to meet his standards, to win battles. And we did, because he demanded it and because we knew that his demands came from understanding, not ego. He wasn't hard on us to feed his pride. He was hard on us because that's what winning required. The 20th century produced a lot of generals. Some were brilliant strategists, some were inspiring leaders, some were administrative geniuses. Patton was aggressive to the point of recklessness, tactically brilliant, personally difficult, and absolutely unwilling to accept failure from himself or anyone under his command. In peacetime, those qualities would have made him insufferable. In wartime, they made him essential. I'm 92 years old now, sitting in this house in Pennsylvania, looking out at the same streets I've walked for 79 years. Everything is different from when I was young. The world has changed in ways that would have seemed impossible in 1943. But human nature hasn't changed. War hasn't changed. The need for strong leadership in times of crisis hasn't changed. We still need the George Pattons of the world, not all the time, not in peace, when their intensity and ruthlessness would do more harm than good. But when evil rises, when nations clash, when young men have to go fight and die, we need leaders who understand what victory costs and are willing to pay that price. Patton paid it. He sacrificed popularity for effectiveness. He sacrificed compassion for competence. He sacrificed kindness for clarity. And he built an army that won battles and brought soldiers home alive. The officers he fired after Kasserine Pass were part of that price. Their careers, their dignity, their reputations. But their sacrifice meant that better officers led troops into battle. And those better officers saved lives. I've carried that knowledge for 79 years. Carried it through my ordinary life, through all the normal days of peace that those wartime decisions made possible. And now, at the end, I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to make sure that the story was told, the truth was recorded, the lesson was preserved. Patton fired every officer who failed him at Kasserine Pass because he understood that in war, there are no second chances. There's only victory or defeat, life or death. And he chose victory. He chose life. He made the hard decisions that kinder men avoided. That's what I want people to remember. Not just the controversy, not just the slapping incidents or the quotes or the pearl-handled revolvers. I want them to remember that he saved lives by refusing to tolerate incompetence, that he turned defeat into victory by demanding excellence, that he was hard on us because the alternative was death. I survived the war because of leaders like Patton. I lived this long life, had this family, made these memories, because in March 1943, a hard man made hard decisions. That's the truth. That's what I lived. And that's what needs to be remembered. The sun has set now. Another day ending, another day closer to joining the men who didn't make it home. I've had more time than I deserve, more time than they got. I've tried to make it count. I've tried to live well enough for all of us. And I've remembered. I've kept the memory of those days alive, the memory of what it took to win, the memory of the men who made hard decisions so that soft men like me could live soft lives afterward. Patton wasn't soft. He couldn't be soft. War doesn't allow softness. It demands hardness, ruthlessness, the willingness to do what must be done regardless of the cost. He had those qualities in abundance. They made him difficult to like but easy to follow. They made him controversial in his time and complicated in history. But they also made him effective. And effectiveness in war means life. It means survival. It means victory. Everything else is secondary. That's what I learned from watching him fire those officers in Tunisia. That's what I carried with me through Sicily and France and Germany. That's what I've understood more clearly with each passing year. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is be harsh. Sometimes the most compassionate choice is the ruthless one. Sometimes saving lives requires ending careers. Patton understood that. He lived it. He enforced it. And because he did, men like me came home alive. I'm glad I knew him, even from a distance. I'm glad I served under the officers he trained and approved. I'm glad I was part of an army he rebuilt with his bare hands and iron will. And I'm glad I survived to tell this story, to make sure that his brutal purge after Kasserine Pass is remembered not as cruelty, but as necessity. Not as ego, but as leadership. Not as vindictiveness, but as mathematics. Lives saved. That's what it came down to. Everything else is details. I hope someone listening to this understands that. I hope someone carries the lesson forward, because the world will need hard leaders again someday. Evil doesn't stay buried. Conflict doesn't stay resolved. And when the next crisis comes, we'll need people willing to make the hard calls, to fire the failures, to demand excellence even when it's unpopular. We'll need people like Patton. I just hope we're wise enough to listen to them when they show up. That's all I have to say. That's my story, my memory, my truth. An old soldier's account of a young soldier's war and the general who taught us what winning required. I'm tired now. Telling this has taken something out of me, but it needed to be told. The men who died, the officers who were fired, the general who made it all happen, they all deserve to be remembered accurately. Not as heroes or villains, but as complicated people doing impossible things in impossible times. That's war. Complicated, impossible, necessary. And the people who fight it, who lead it, who survive it, we're all just doing our best in circumstances that would break anyone given enough time. Patton didn't break. He broke others when necessary, but he didn't break himself. That was his gift and his curse. The strength to do what had to be done, paired with the inability to stop doing it even when the moment passed. He died still fighting, still pushing, still demanding, still being necessary in a world that wanted to move past necessity into comfort. I survived by finding peace with comfort, by accepting that I'd done my part and could rest. He couldn't. That difference defined us both. I'm at peace now, with what I saw, what I did, what I survived, with the decisions Patton made and the consequences they produced, with all of it. And if there's anything after this life, if I see those men again someday, the ones who didn't make it home, I'll tell them their sacrifice mattered, that the war was won, that the world they died to preserve has lasted 80 years so far and might last longer still. That's enough. That has to be enough. This is Henry Lawson, 92 years old, still remembering, finally telling, hoping someone listens and understands. The war ended 80 years ago, but its lessons never end. Its truths never fade. And the men who fought it, who led it, who made the hard choices that victory required, they deserve to be remembered for what they really were. Not perfect, not simple, but necessary. Just like Patton's brutal purge, just like every hard decision made in hard times by hard men. Necessary. That's the word I keep coming back to. That's the truth I've learned. That's what I want you to remember when this story ends and my voice falls silent. Necessary. Everything else is just details.